Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Jaya Jaya Shri Caitanya Jaya Nityananda Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna Krishna Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Nitya Lila Pravishtom Vishnupada Paramahansa Privrajacharya Stotra Shada Shri Srimad Bhai Charanaravindra Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishtam Vishnupada Paramahansa Privrajacharya Stotra Shada Shri Srimad Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishtam Vishnupada Srila Gorkishore Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishtam Vishnupada Srila Satchidananda Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai Nitya Lila Pravishtam Vishnupada Srila Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj Ki Jai Shri Gauriya Vaishnav Guru Varga Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Nandakoti Vaishnav Vrinda Ki Jai Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur Ki Jai Shri Caitanya Caritamrita Ki Jai Prem Se Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Nittai Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol all very simple very Hare Krishna all very simple very Hare Krishna all very simple very Hare Krishna all very Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga all very Srila Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Namo Vishnu Krishna Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dina Bandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gora Tushe Namaha Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare So, welcome again to Caitanya Caritamrita class. Today we are going to be continuing with our with our now build up into the proper samvad of the Rai Ramananda Samvad with this initial encounter of Mahaprabhu with Rai Ramananda. So, with this encounter, we are building up the tension, so to speak. I've been building up the anticipation for this conversation for a while, and for good reason. It is a very esoteric and elevated conversation. And so, we've been reading how Mahaprabhu, at the bank of the Godavari, he is hearing the great opulent music of the trumpets being played around Ramananda Rai, a very regal welcoming for Ramananda Rai. As we know, kings, they are welcomed by, they're welcomed by trumpets. And even though Ramananda Rai is not a king, he is in a very, very elevated position in the government which he is serving in, and therefore he is given quite a lot of pomp and glory. So, hearing all of these, Mahaprabhu, he becomes very agitated, very eager to have the association of such a Roshik Bhakta. And with such tension building, suddenly they meet. And with no words being spoken, they merely embraced and went ecstatically. And so, with only a few words spoken, they embraced and became ecstatic. Because of course, these are no two random personalities, but Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead himself, and Vishakha Gopi, these two personalities meeting together. And we spoke something of the significance of Ramananda Rai's identity with Vishakha yesterday. Just again to reiterate the pramanas that I was presenting, or rather to add to them, I was just in my reading, I came across a quote from Bhaktivinoda Thakur, who also, within the context of the Rai Ramananda Samvad, directly identified Rai Ramananda as Vishakha. So, again, even though there is some variety of opinions as to who is Lalita or who is Vishakha among Swarup Damodar and Rai Ramananda, within this context, our acharyas, as they are so mercifully ready to do and do so oftenly, they have clarified for us the tattva, at least in relation to the pastime of the Rai Ramananda Samvad, or broadly within the mood of service to Srimati Radharani in Gaur Lila. So then, with this identification being made, these two, they began to become very ecstatic. However, being seen by the Vedic Brahmins, who were very much bound up, the great liberating rules and regulations of the Vedic literature, which are there to bring one to the higher platform, if one holds onto them too dearly or too excessively, they merely act as a form of bondage. It's just another material consideration which holds one down. And so, in many a way, they began to criticize, because too much they were relegating reality within the terms of these rules and regulations that are a means to an end. And what is that end? It is, of course, to eventually climb up that great ladder of yoga and enter into devotional service. So, not having had climbed up that ladder and being somewhat satisfied with the lower rung that they were on, they spoke critically and did not understand the elevated nature of what they were seeing before them. And so because of that, Mahaprabhu so clearly demonstrates what happens if we approach these things in an unqualified manner. Which is to say that he hides and restrains these things because what are they? They are now sajatiya. They are not sajatiya. They are vijatiya. They are outside of the circle of intimacy with Sri Bhagavan. So, like this, Mahaprabhu restrains himself. He restrains himself because these people are not qualified to see. Again, another reminder. We need to be, this whole build-up is a reminder of how elevated this discourse will be. When they regained their sanity, so now we'll hear text 29 of this 8th chapter of Madhya Lila. When they regained their sanity, they both sat down, and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu smiled and began to speak as follows. Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya spoke of your good qualities, and he made a great endeavor to convince me to meet you. Indeed, I have come here just to meet you. It is very good that even without making an effort, I have gotten your interview here. And Ramananda Rai replied, Sarvabhaum Bhattacharya thinks of me as his servant. Even in my absence, he is very careful to do me good. Here we find the wonderful humility of Ramananda Rai. the wonderful humility. We know the way that Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya spoke of Ramananda Rai, and it was of a personality who was so beyond Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya's understanding that he was not able to relish his transcendental qualities. We know that Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya definitely did not see Ramananda Rai as his servant. But again, the devotee does not see himself as anything more than the das of the servant, of the servant, of the servant. And so Ramananda Rai continues, "By his mercy, I have received your interview here. Consequently, I consider that today I have become a successful human being. I can see that you have bestowed special mercy upon Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya. Therefore, you have touched me, although I am untouchable. This is due only to his love for you." So we see here a description. Here we find Ramananda Rai, he's referring to himself as being untouchable, asprishya. And yet, sprishya, to touch, what does Mahaprabhu do? He has sparshile, he has touched him, spurshile. So we have found a passing through again of any sort of external etiquette which would limit the compassion and the love to be reciprocated between devotees. All of that does not matter once one is on a devotional platform. However, there is something interesting to speak of the untouchable apparent nature of Ramananda Rai. Because we will hear a little bit of his description of this nature, and then we will elaborate a little bit on his caste and so on and so forth. He says, "You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Narayan himself, and I'm only a government servant interested in materialistic activities. Indeed, I am the lowest among men of the fourth caste, Shudro Odhom." So, I am the lowest of the Shudras. And then what does he say? "You do not fear the Vedic injunction stating that you should not associate with a Shudra. You are not contemptuous of my touch, although in the Vedas you are forbidden to associate with Shudras." So here is the twofold understanding of why Ramananda Rai saw himself as a fallen, degraded soul. Firstly, and most centrally, he was a Shudra. There are some different descriptions of which caste he belongs to. How some will say he's Kayasta, some would say he is in a caste that is somewhat similar to the Kayastas. However, all are in unanimous agreement that he was a Shudra, obviously, because this is how he has described and admitted to himself. The other point is that he is saying, I am a government servant interested in materialistic activities. Of course, we know Ramananda Rai, even though he is a grihasta, and even though he is engaged in so many elevated activities, Mahaprabhu himself said that Ramananda Rai has more self-control than I do, even though I'm a sannyasi. Obviously, this is not to say that Mahaprabhu is not in control of his senses, but it is to speak of the great glorification, of the perfection of Ramananda Rai's sense control. Mahaprabhu says this to make the point that actually it doesn't matter if one is a grihasta, a vanaprastha, brahmacharya, or sannyasi. Of the 4 stages of life, the 4 ashrams, it is the brahmachari, vanaprastha, and sannyas phases which are so strongly typified by brahmacharya, celibacy. And a celibacy which is an expression of one's deep and powerful sense control. However, the perfection of the grihastha ashram is also in brahmacharya. His Holiness Gaur Govinda Maharaj would often make this point, that the perfect grihastha is also a brahmachari. And Ramananda Rai so strongly embodies this ideal. Ramananda Rai, he is about to speak the highest and most rasic of topics that are held away for anyone who even has a slight dint or temptation towards sensual gratification. And yet he is not in any formal ashram of renunciation. Again, Krishna consciousness is beyond material factors. And so Ramananda Rai, he is very qualified, irregardless of his grihastha ashram and irregardless of his governmental service. We know Mahaprabhu, we will read very soon, in a few chapters later, very sweetly, Mahaprabhu, he rejects the association, the attempt for some kingly people to have his darshan. Why? Because he says, oh, kings, a sannyasi is not fit to associate with such worldly people as administrators and so on and so forth. He says, even my association with him would be like a black spot upon the white cloth of my sannyas. Because we know a black stain is so much more evident upon white cloth than on any other cloth, and so it glares. However, this is not a concern. We know Mahaprabhu, he is forget about avoiding even having the darshan taken. He is hugging and crying and being ecstatic with Ramananda Rai. Again, Krishna bhakti is transcendental to any material factor. Although some material factors may make it easier to execute Krishna bhakti is not contingent or dependent upon anything. Anything material. It is merely contingent on the mercy of the Vaishnavas and on the Bhakti Shakti itself. It is independent and it is supreme. So then we have the second consideration, that I am a Shudra. I'm the lowest of the low. I am at this low Varna. So now we have heard the question of ashram being addressed, and now he is coming to the point of Varna. I'm a Shudra. And we will hear in this purport, we will hear why it doesn't really matter. It is, again, devotional service transcends material conditioning and material considerations. However, there is something interesting to be said of the Shudra classes, of the more educated folk. Because we will find that we have a very, very similar case in our great Acharya, His Divine Grace, Om Vishnupad Paramahansa Parivrajacharya Shtotra Shada Shri Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Srila Prabhupada. Contrary to what some people may think, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was also a Shudra, by birth, not by qualities. He was in a Kayastha family, and the Kayasthas in general were scribes. They took to literary work. Of course, now we see literacy as the great sign of the elevated members of society. If somebody is illiterate, generally speaking, it is seen to be a testament to his lack of societal refinement. However, we know the Vedic culture, and actually practically every culture had some sort of notion of this, of scribes not exactly being the most educated or culturally refined members of society. And especially in Vedic culture, which is so much built on an oral transmission of knowledge, writing was not seen as such a high thing, and so Shudras were engaged in the writing scribal work. However, we find in the turn of history, and especially in the context of Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, especially in that context, we find something very interesting. With the British colonization of India, we find a special sort of movement or a special sort of new societal category being generated. These are known as the Bhadralok, the refined, cultured people. And a preponderance of them were Kayasthas. Because, of course, now we have a culture which very much values literacy, and so they were engaged in a lot of education. In fact, to such a degree that it's generally held that a lot of the Bengali communists, we know communism is very much about breaking up the social order and all. A lot of the Bengali communists were Brahmins. And the reason why is because a lot of the Brahmins felt disenfranchised. Their role as the intellectuals in Bengal was getting usurped by these Shudras who were being so well educated by the British, the Bhadralok. And so, upset with a system now that seems to have nothing to do for them, they became somewhat revolutionary against the social fabric of Bengal. And so, many Brahmins took to communism because they were feeling, and in many ways they practically were, being replaced by the Kayastha clan. Here, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, also interestingly, he has written a book on the history of the Kayasthas. They have many different last names. The one which Bhaktivinoda Thakur had, and obviously his son Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur had in turn was Datta. Kedarnath Datta, that was the birth name of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he has written a history of his family, and in that we find that actually Narottam Das Thakur, that great Vaishnav poet, we sing his great bhajans so often. This Narottam Das Thakur, who in his bhajans has so perfectly encapsulated the Siddhanta and conclusions of the Gauriya Vedanta, of the Chaitanya Vaishnav school, this Narottam Das Thakur, his father was also belonging to the Kayastha clan. Narottam Das Thakur is amazing. In a sense, he was one of the original book distributors. Obviously, the Six Goswamis also were, more literally making books. However, prior to the advent of the Brihad Mridanga, of the printing press, which allowed books to go out so easily and so wonderfully everywhere, Narottam Das Thakur had another way of mass-producing the literary works, which was, of course, to write sweet bhajans. Songs are very easy to remember. We know so many times people will be able to memorize lyrics of songs, even if they don't want to. There's so many nonsense, mundane, rubbish music that that I've memorized just by hearing them played in train stations or in shopping centers or things like that. So, songs are very easy to remember. And in this sense, Narottam Das Thakur, he utilized the minds of all the people as his form of the Brihad Mridanga. And by making these songs that could be memorized, they could be sung to people. And then like that, it was a form of distribution of literature. And like that, the wonderful preaching of the Chaitanya Vaishnav cult continued. So Narottam Das Thakur was also from this Kayastha clan. And so Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur also belonged to it. And so the Kayasthas, they were interesting because much like the rest of the Bhadralok, who were not of Brahminical birth, it was sort of a question what to do because they were really, really showing a lot of the qualities of Brahmins. They were very educated. It is said of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada, that he never once had to read a book because everything he was taught in class he instantly remembered. He had no need to revise from books. Not to say, of course, that he didn't love books. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, as his name would imply, was is a great scholar. And actually, he was employed after his graduation from school as a librarian for one of the local British authorities. And it's said that he read every single book available in that library as he performed his work as a librarian. This is very much reflected if one reads the works of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, especially his essays. Brahma Samhita, even though it has the name Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur on the cover, it was also composed with a lot of the help of Bhakti Pradip Tirtha Maharaj and N.K. Sanyal, two senior disciples of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, so it has a bit of their English mixed in. But if you want to purely be exposed to the difficulty, or rather the intensity of the very intellectual sweetness of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's English, one can read some of his writings that have been published in Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhav by His Holiness Pujyapad Bhakti Vikas Swami Maharaj, or one can find floating around the internet on ISKCON Desire Tree a few of his articles that he has composed in English. Very, very difficult English. I remember I was reading one essay of his, and I had to have the dictionary open right next to me. Every third or fourth word, I had no idea what it meant, and even some words I couldn't find in the dictionary. I had to sort of guess what they meant by trying to figure out the root words of it. Anyways, so he was very, very intellectual and showing these qualities of a very sober intellect, of being a very sober and strongly ethical character. These are all the features of a Brahmin, and not that of a Shudra. So then what to do? So there were some different ideas. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, to a limited degree, was involved in some Kayastha groups that were pushing for Kayasthas to be allowed to wear the Brahminical thread, which was considered very controversial, and which was something that he received a lot of criticism for doing. And he would receive a whole lot more criticism, as we'll discuss later, when he decided to then give the Brahminical thread to Brahmins. So he took the Brahminical thread, even though, again, he was from a Kayastha family, as obviously was Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So then what to do? In fact, a place of education, and I can't remember now if it was Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur or Bhaktivinoda Thakur who studied there, but one of them studied there, and this place had actually made an exception. It was a more progressive Hindu-Indian place of study, and they said, we admit Brahmins, and we also admit Kayasthas and other sort of historically elevated castes that have climbed up, jatis that have climbed up through the ranks. So like this, we see that the Kayasthas have a very interesting sort of dynamic. And we find, again, throughout our parampara, not just Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, not just Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but also Narottam Das Thakur and other acharyas. And actually, this is a great refutation of some people. They will say that, one has to be a Brahmin in order to be a guru. But this is strongly not our philosophy, and it is not history. Forget about using Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Bhaktivinoda Thakur as examples. We can go all the way back to Narottam Das Thakur. Not that we would want to forget Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur or Bhaktivinoda Thakur, but I'm merely making the point that it is very ancient in our parampara to appeal to such things. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur made it a great element of his propaganda to preach that actually it does not matter if one is from a Brahminical birth. If one has begun the path of Vaishnava Bhakti, if one has begun and entered into the path of Krishna Bhakti, then one is already greater than a Brahmin. And if one is greater than a Brahmin, then he easily can act as a Brahmin. It would be nonsensical to say that one is greater than a Brahmin, but they can't act as one. So, this idea was an idea that he pushed. And it wasn't such an uncommon idea at the time. This was a time, again, which was very much evidencing the false nature of the pseudo-Vedic, the false Vedic conceptions of caste Brahmanism, or of the guru being passed through by lineage, by family line. Other famous Kayasthas were Subhash Chandra Bose, the freedom fighter. There was another freedom fighter who I've forgotten the name of. He was something Chandra. Yeah, I've forgotten his name. A Bengali one. He was a Vaishnav. He was also a Kayastha. And, of course, Swami Vivekananda, Shami Vivekanando. The contemporary, in a sense, of Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. Both were Kayasthas and both sought to sort of try to reevaluate the system. However, they did so in different ways. Subhash Chandra Bose is a communist and not really relevant to spiritual discussions. And Vivekananda, in a sense, is not that relevant to spiritual discussions either, except in order to decry his nonsense philosophy. Because even though there is some similarity, the era that they were coming from, the families that they were born into, some records say that there was a distant blood relation between Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur and Vivekananda. However, at the very least, they come from the same jati. However, this is really where the similarities begin to end. Because Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was interested in what? He was interested in presenting the timeless wisdom of the Vedas in a proper orthodox way, in a way that is loyal to the traditional philosophy, traditional in a dynamic sense, mind you, not held down by tradition, but respecting the tradition which can be dynamic, a tradition whose essence can dance into the present and into the future. And so he unshackled the tradition so that the tradition can dynamically exist now. An innovator, yes, but an innovator who danced with the rhythm of tradition. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur was loyal and wished to present the Vedas as they were, of course considering time, place and circumstance, and therefore inaugurated such great reforms which some may present as a break with tradition, but in reality, in actuality, are a true continuation of the tradition, because Gauriya Vaishnavism, Chaitanya Vaishnavism is a dynamic thing. It is not a thing which is constrained to certain contexts through generation after generation of the parampara, of the great sadhus following in the footsteps of Rupa Goswami. We have seen innovation and dynamic interaction with the time, place and circumstance. And those who claim that Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur broke from tradition, it is they who have broken from tradition, because they have broken from a tradition that happily was able to reapply itself depending on context, and instead have decided to solidify what was never intended to be solidified. It is the so-called traditionalists who have broken with the tradition of Sri Chaitanya Vaishnavism. And so therefore it is the so-called traditionalists who are anti-traditional. And it's Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur who is seeking to not reinvent, but reapply the eternal, transcendental truths of Krishna consciousness according to time, place, and circumstance. It is he who is the great traditionalist by actually understanding what is the essence and behavior of our tradition. So, this is Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mood. He's appealing to philosophy, and philosophy grounded in the Vedas. Not that he was not aware of the various other philosophical schools that had come from the West. Now we compare that to Vivekananda. Vivekananda had, in most respects, Vivekananda was just sort of offering some botched Frankenstein's monster of European philosophy. Rather than being somebody who was willing to take the education, willing to take the ideas of the Western world and find a way to preach Krishna consciousness using them as a bridge, instead, Vivekananda almost did the opposite. He adopted some random Sanskrit words here and there, decided to pull out a reference to the Vedas where he saw fit in order to push Western or not even Western, because there's nothing necessarily inherently wrong with a Western idea, but non-Vedic ideas and import them into the Vedic world. This is a problem that even exists in the Bhadralok-influenced communities, even outside of Orthodox Vaishnav Dharma. Even the Buddhists. I remember reading a book called Buddhist Romanticism. And in there, the bhikkhu, because bhikkhu is how is the name of the renunciates within especially Theravada, Sri Lankan Buddhism, although his order was a Thai order, it doesn't really matter. And he wrote this book, and he was saying what passes as Buddhism today is really just German idealism, German romanticism, the work of the European romanticist poets, the work of the American transcendentalist poets like Thoreau, and so on and so forth. And even he says that one of the big entry points by which the Vedic, or he didn't use the word Vedic, by which the thoughts which have arisen from the Vedic context, the great vessel by which they have been hijacked, was this Vivekananda. Vivekananda, he instead decided to propose the ideas and replace the proper Vedic conclusions with his own speculations built on the further speculations of random European poets. And so Vivekananda, he is not in the same, even though we can call some similarities, he is not in the same league as Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. He's not even in the same building. He is off destroying Vedic culture. And in fact, this is a view that's held, this isn't even just a Vaishnav criticism of Vivekananda. Many orthodox followers of Shankara will say the same thing. I remember hearing a story, one Tamil Brahmin who was initiated into the line of Shankara. He was once asked, he was once asked about some Mayavad ideas, and this person said, oh, I've read Vivekananda's work. And this Tamil Sanskrit scholar, Brahmin, began to laugh. And he said, what does Vivekananda know of the Vedas? Actually, Vivekananda knew barely anything. Same with Ramakrishna, because actually, Vivekananda's ideas are not based on the bona fide, understandings that have been given by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. They're not based on the same things which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur based his ideas upon. Which is not the whimsical, emotional sentimentalism which just decided to pop into the head of a conditioned soul. No, he bases upon Shastra, Sadhu, and Guru. Great, concrete foundations. Vivekananda based his ideas off of Ramakrishna, who had no education in Vedic topics, who merely had mystical visions. Who knows where they came from? But anyone can lay claim to having mystical visions. That is no epistemological source. That is no valid epistemology. And so Vivekananda, by taking the random experiences of a Bengali tantric who would eat meat and all these other things, decided to build some grand philosophy, and presenting this, he presented his false notions and therefore corrupted Vedic culture all around India. He was not the person to begin that corruption, but he was one of the greatest weapons of Kali Yuga in order to destroy Vedic understanding and Vedic knowledge. So to compare Vivekananda and Bhaktisiddhanta is is not appropriate even. Not even in the same ballpark. But they were both Kayasthas. So this is to speak of the interesting nature of the Kayastha clan. And so Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, being a Kayastha, there was some great opposition towards him. We know there is a very, very famous incident where Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he was asked to debate whether a non-Vaishnav can be a guru. Or a non-Brahmin can be a guru. And this famous debate was published as Vaishnava or Brahman. A great book. You can find it, you can purchase it in some libraries. The book was based upon his argumentation. And in there, he was arguing that actually it is fine. If one is a Vaishnava, as I said before, they are greater than a Brahmin. My revered spiritual master, His Holiness Radha Govinda Das Goswami Maharaj, he says actually that people sometimes refer to second initiation as Brahminical initiation. This is when one becomes a Brahmin. But actually, at the time of first initiation, one has already been formally accepted as a Vaishnava, and therefore they are already greater than a Brahmin. One is a Brahmin even at the time of first initiation. Forget second. So, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur made this point, and he absolutely destroyed the opposition, as we can expect from such a genius. We know Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he prayed to Jagannath, because he was the magistrate in Puri at the time. Again, speaking to the elevated role that Kayasthas played in society at the time. And he prayed, please, I need some help. I want to propagate the Sankirtan mission. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he so famously wrote that he would love to see in Mayapur Dham the Frenchman and the Britishman playing mridanga and kartal, singing the holy names of Krishna, serving Nam Prabhu. And so he envisioned this and he wished for some help. And when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Prabhupada was born, he was born with a mak that was like a Brahmin's thread around his body. And Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur took this as a sign that he has been sent to assist me in this. And he did assist, and so he went and debated this topic. And there was a lot of controversy, not only because he absolutely decimated the false conclusions of those people who were so attached to the material factors of their birth that they would blaspheme and ignore the genuine and highest consideration and highest qualification of Vaishnava Bhakti. Not only because he destroyed their erroneous ideas and conceptions, but also because he was a Kayastha. What is he doing debating Brahmins? And then how much more scandalous would it be when he defeats them? And this would get even more controversial because as it went along, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he would give initiation to Brahmins. So many of Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's disciples were from Brahminical families. Srila Prabhupada's godbrother, Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj, he was from a very Brahminical family, like he was held to very high Brahminical status. And he was initiated, even given the Brahminical thread again. He was told the Gayatri Mantra again by Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is giving the Brahminical thread, even though he is not by birth considered a Brahmin, to Brahmins, or Brahmins by birth and by quality in the case of his disciples. So how controversial. But not only how controversial, but how bona fide. How much in the serving to the essence of spiritual life is this? The only qualification that matters is that one is a devotee of Krishna. And then one transcends all other material concerns, because devotion to Krishna, the Krishna Shakti, is a pure Shakti. It transcends this exterior Maya Shakti. It is beyond that thing. It is beyond that, and therefore it doesn't concern elements of this material world. Vishnu Bhakti, Krishna Bhakti, the Bhakti Shakti descends independent and above and sovereign over material nature. So how then can material nature cover it or color it or condition it? Once the superior energy of Bhakti Shakti appears, there is no way that it can be colored or conditioned by our behavior. Which is why on the path of devotional service there are only steps forward. There are no steps backward. except in the case in which we offend the devotee. And the reason for that, the reason why there's that condition isn't just some random exclusion, some random qualification to the rule. The reason why that is because the devotees are the means by which the Bhakti Shakti is channeled into this world. And if we offend that vessel, that means by which the Bhakti Shakti enters and floods this world with love of Godhead, then of course we would be bereft of it. Not because we have brought any material concern to the table, but because we have offended the spiritual concern. We have obstructed the flow of the spiritual flow by which it can be applied to us. And so then, you do not fear the Vedic injunctions stating that you should not associate with a Shudra. You are not contemptuous of my touch, although in the Vedas you are forbidden to associate with Shudras. And Srila Prabhupada writes so wonderfully, presenting an argument so much in the mood of Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that all these things do not matter. He quotes the Bhagavad Gita, O son of Pritha, those who take shelter in me, though they be of lower birth, women, Vaishyas, as well as Shudras, can attain the supreme destination. And so, Prabhupada says, actually, a low life means a life without Krishna consciousness. All of the pomp that many of these Brahmins may have, but if any of those Brahmins who are debating Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, no matter if they were born in the highest of Brahmin families, if they did not have Krishna consciousness, practically they were living at a far lower birth than even the lowest Shudra who is having remembrance of Krishna. And so, Prabhupada, he continues and he gives this very, very sweet description. He gives some Shastric Pramana. And he even says, goes so far to say, that forget about the devotee transcending his birth. Forget about us not needing to care about the birth. Forget about the negative nature of the birth being gone for the devotee. If one judges a devotee based on his birth, he goes to hell very quickly, according to the Padma Purana. And then Srila Prabhupada says, although Sri Ramananda Rai supposedly took birth in a Shudra family, he is not to be considered a Shudra, for he was a great advanced devotee. Indeed, he was on the transcendental platform. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu therefore embraced him. Out of spiritual humility, Sri Ramananda Rai presented himself as a Shudra. And so then Srila Prabhupada continues to essentially make the point that material factors do not limit one's spiritual acumen or quality. And so that is the purport of text 36. I think it's a very sweet purport to mull over and read over a lot. And then what does he say, Sri Ramananda Roy? He says, Tomar kripaya tomai koraya nindya kormo shokhat ishor tumi ke jane tomar murmo. You are the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. Therefore, no one can understand your purpose. By your mercy, you are touching me, although this is not sanctioned by the Vedas. And Srila Prabhupada says that a sannyasi is strictly forbidden to see the Vishayis, the materialistic people. But Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, out of his boundless and causeless mercy, could show favor to anyone, regardless of birth and position. And actually, again, this is a continuation of Ramananda Rai speaking with humility. Because the body of the devotee, the Vedas speak very much about associating with devotees, and it is not saying to avoid such association. Such association is worshipable. Even a speck of such association is the perfection of infinite lives spent doing so many other things. And so then he continues, and he says, you have come here specifically to deliver me. You are so merciful that you alone can deliver all fallen souls. So, and then we see the very nice quotation of that beautiful bhajan. Every morning they sing it in Mayapur in front of Panchatattva by Narottam Das Thakur, who we have already mentioned. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Doya Koro More Toma bina ke doyalu Jogoto সংসারে Potito pabonno hetu Tobo botaro Moshomo potito prabhu Napaibe aro. My dear Lord, please be merciful to me. Who can be more merciful than your Lordship within these three worlds? You appear as an incarnation just to reclaim the conditioned, fallen souls, but I assure you that you will not find a soul more fallen than me. So again, this sentiment is echoed, and this is an important sentiment to make, and maybe we will conclude on this sentiment. Maybe we'll speak a little bit more. And then I was going to discuss I said yesterday we would discuss furthermore the identity of Ramananda Rai, also as Arjuna, but I do not believe we will have time tonight. So when we resume again the Caitanya Caritamrita classes, then we will hear something about Arjuna's identity as Ramananda Rai, and Ramananda Rai also identifying as Arjuna Gopi, and what that means for the special nature of the Rai Ramananda Samvad. However, the point that is made here is Ramananda Rai, he's not saying, as many people might, when their ego is hurt, if they're a devotee, and they might say, hey, what are you doing? I'm a Vaishnava. It doesn't matter where I'm born. Instead, he is embracing whatever fallen element he can identify in himself in order to bolster his humility. Narottam Das Thakur, what a great devotee. I mean, I'm not qualified to even glorify Narottam Das Thakur. And yet, he is speaking of his fallen nature. The response of the devotee isn't to hear all of these things that Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur is preaching, that Srila Prabhupada, our Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada is preaching, to hear these things and then say, therefore I am a Vaishnava and now I am greater than the Brahmins. Instead, they should say, I'm trying to aspire to be a Vaishnava. The response to insult, the response to insult to the devotees is anger. The response of insult to Krishna is anger, but the response of insult to oneself is, yes, you are right, I am so fallen. It is not, hey, actually I'm a Vaishnava, so I am qualified to do all these things. It is not, hey, I am a Vaishnava, so I am greater than a Brahmin. It is, I am the most fallen. And yet by my spiritual master's mercy, I have been engaged in doing all these things. It is not that one must out of a false humility say, I am too fallen then because of my birth to do Pujari Seva or something like this. The spiritual master desires it. But one should not think that I'm doing this because now I am a Vaishnava. I am worshipping Krishna. Now I am so great. All of these texts describing the glories of the Vaishnava, the glories of Vaishnava Sangha, they are applying to me. I am doing so much great mercy by allowing people to associate with me because I am Vaishnava Thakur. If one is thinking like that, then they are. Then we can know for certain that there is not so much understanding being made of what is Vaishnava Thakur. So we see here. Rai Ramananda, and in the purport, Narottam Das Thakur. This is the nature of the devotee. And this is the nature of the devotee in light of those great truths of the elevated position of the Vaishnava. And then we hear in text 39, and we'll conclude on text 39, he says, Right, Ramananda, it is the general practice of all saintly people to deliver the fallen. Therefore, they go to people's houses, although they have no personal business there. And here is made a very, very sweet point. And what is that point? The point is that when the devotee goes on book distribution, when the devotee goes, to ask for some donation, sometimes people, they will see sadhus, and they will see this beggar is coming with their begging bowl. This beggar is coming with his begging bowl to beg something of me. He is so poor. Maybe I feel bad. I will give him something. You know, he needs so much. Actually, the sadhu needs nothing. The only wealth that really exists is Krishna consciousness, and the people who the sadhus are visiting are devoid of that wealth, and therefore they are poor no matter what material opulence they feel they have. And the sadhus, because they have Krishna consciousness, are wealthier than any person, no matter what top 10 list they are on of the top 10 richest people in who cares where. They are all the people in the greatest of poverty. And therefore, when the sadhu comes knocking to beg his alms, he is not coming to get something. He is coming only to give. He's coming only to give the opportunity for somebody to be given some mercy. By in some way to engage all of their materialistic money that has been accrued through all sorts of mundane measures, some way to legitimize them by providing some spiritual mercy. By providing that donation, by providing some grain, by providing something to the sadhu, that person is receiving the greatest wealth. And then, if by some great fortune they are able to hear some Krishna Katha, then they are truly, from that sadhu, then they truly have received the wealth. And everything that they have given is meaningless. They may as well have given nothing in comparison to the gift that they are receiving. So the sadhu, the renunciate, he is not coming in order to get something, in order to get something that he needs. He is coming in order to give something that the world and everyone else is in need of. And so when book distribution is happening, when the book, sometimes it can seem like we are trying to sell something. I need to, we are trying to get this many points or something. But actually, the point of book distribution is a mercy. So many people on the street, if you ever go to book distribution, especially on Pitt Street, Pitt Street is like the heart of Rajagun, and with a healthy dose of Tamagun inside. And if you go and do book distribution there, everyone is too busy. They act as if you are a nuisance. But actually the only person, and they'll sometimes be very rude and try to insult, but really the person that they are damaging the most is themselves. Even ignoring concerns of offending devotees, even ignoring that, they are being presented the greatest wealth for nothing. A gold coin donation, maybe, for nothing. Practically speaking, they're being presented the greatest wealth and they are rejecting it. When we see book distribution, we are not seeing somebody trying to raise funds necessarily for the temple, although that is a great side effect that is, again, providing such great benefit. It is not for the benefit of the devotees that book distribution or other means of fundraising are being performed. Not that book distribution is a form of fundraising, but you'll get what I mean. But that any time that any of this is happening, the essence of it is that it is the person who is giving money. It is the person who is hearing the words of the book distributor or the person who is raising funds. It is they who are benefiting. All of the benefit is essentially happening for that person who is having the fortunate encounter with the devotees. And on that note, we will conclude. And then we will resume our discussion. Now we're getting so close to the Rai Ramananda Samvad properly commencing, and we are getting very close. We will continue to hear a few more initial considerations, but we are maybe 10, 20 texts away. So next time we will discuss a little bit about Rai Ramananda's identity as Arjuna, and then we will hopefully either get to the very brisk of the first few words of the Rai Ramananda Samvad, or we will properly delve into them at least for an initial taste. Srila Krishnadas Kaviraj Thakur ki jai, Shri Caitanya Caritamrita ki jai.